Hey everyone, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail. And before we get into today's case, I just wanted to go over a few things. One thing I just wanted to say was, I know way back when, like 5 or 6 months ago, I said that I was going to try and reply to every comment, and I still make my best effort to respond to every comment, but it's hard, and oftentimes, like, there's just so many off-the-wall comments, like, people saying like, oh, this whole case is a hoax, or then there's these people that are obsessed with Mr. Politis and say like, oh, he's cornered the market, so why bother doing your cases? Which inherently they don't realize that how dumb that comment is to begin with. First of all, human beings aren't a market. Just because Mr. Politis wrote books about certain cases doesn't mean he owns them. And the people have been studying and investigating these cases for decades. I started researching and working on cases before I even heard Mr. Politis' name. And I think what he's doing is great, and he has his own thing, and that's fine. But I don't understand why some people need to constantly bring that up. I mean, if you read or look into what he does, he has a very specific criteria for cases that he will cover and write about. I don't. I'll cover any case that I can find or that you guys recommend to me. And doesn't mean one is better than the other. And if you prefer Mr. Politis, then watch his channel. I'm not asking you or forcing you to watch my content. I think that personally, the more minds and eyes we have looking at these cases, the better. And honestly, I think Mr. Politis would agree. I think some people get so caught up in, just being like a crazed fan, and they lose sight of what we're actually trying to do. And a lot of people, I just wanted to say, like, for those of you that haven't subscribed to the channel, now normally I don't ask people to subscribe or like or anything like that, but a lot of people that have been watching my videos, and I really appreciate it, but you'll say to me like, oh, maybe you could cover this case, and it's a case that I've already covered, and in some cases I've covered, done multiple videos on it. So I encourage you, those that aren't subscribed, to maybe give me a chance and subscribe, and it's free, and hey, if you don't end up liking it, no big deal, you can unsubscribe. But I noticed that a big portion of people that are watching are not subscribed, and it would mean a lot to me if you guys could subscribe, because what I'm trying to do is really helping these people, and the more people that I can get on board, the quicker we can actually make some real progress in aiding some of these families. So okay, so let's get into today's case. We are going to be going back up to Alaska, to Seward, Alaska, and this case is very bizarre, as a lot of these cases are. But one of my videos I had mentioned that a lot of people go missing when they're in groups or a lot of people are around, and I got several comments saying like, oh, that's impossible, that's never happened. And I just kind of had to laugh to myself, because it does happen, and it happens all the time. I mean, maybe not as relevant or as many times as like when people are alone, but there are many cases where people are in groups or there's lots of people around and they seemingly vanish. And that's the case here with Michael LeMaitre, who went missing in 2012 up in Seward, Alaska on July 4th. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what he was doing there. There is this marathon race, that marathon mountain race, which is insane. I'm going to go over it, but as you can see in some of these pictures, it is a 5K, but it is basically like the combination of like a Tough Mudder, a Spartan race, and a 5K all rolled into one. I mean, it is a really tough race. It started out back in the early 1900s, 1915, I believe. It's got 3,022 feet of vertical gain and loss over very often icy and very treacherous mountain terrain. Now, runners can actually pick their own way up and down, and the average slope is around 38 degrees. As you can see in some of these pictures, I know pictures don't often do the grade justice, but it really is a tough race. And unfortunately, the day that Michael was racing, it was very, very foggy, very rainy. The conditions were just not good at all. And just on top of everything else, this race is hard enough without conditions being bad. Michael was a 65-year-old businessman from Anchorage, and this was his first time attempting this race. Like I said, it was held on July 4th, 2012. and it is considered an extreme event. And the last he was seen, he was about 200 feet from the top, and he was technically in last place. He was last seen wearing black shorts, a black t-shirt, and a black headband. Now, at this point, no one really thought anything of it. They just figured he was in last place and, he'd be coming down. But the weather was getting worse at this time. More rain was coming in. And he was about to start the descent, which is a very dangerous descent. Like I said, they can choose their own route, but all the routes go over very rocky and past several cliffs. And along the routes, there's no signage. So it's just kind of like, choose your own adventure. At this point in the race, he had about 1.5 miles to go. The race starts in downtown Seward, and they run for about half a mile to the bottom of Mount Marathon. Then there's like a scrambling section with about 2,900 vertical feet straight up cliffs, and it's usually a lot of mud and waterfalls, and just it's a very, very difficult run. And there is a lottery system to get into this, and most of the people that do this race, according to the head of the race, there's about 90% of the participants that have done this in the past, so they have experience. But unfortunately, this was Michael's first time, and they say that obviously for beginners, it's the most dangerous. Michael had started his wave of the race at around 3:15 p.m. that day, and around 5:45 p.m., Tom Walsh, who is a race steward, saw Michael ascending around the turnaround point with about 200 feet to go, and that was the last point of where he was seen. The race steward, Tom Walsh, asked Michael for his bib number, which was 548, and he estimated that he should be back down in about an hour and a half. Well, hours and hours passed, and he never came down. So around 8 p.m. that night, his wife, Peggy, called for search and rescue, because at this point the temperatures were falling very dangerously and the rain was just terrible. The search got started right away, and at first they thought they would find him because, there was hundreds of people around, hundreds of spectators. It was, how could this guy just disappear into thin air? Well, by 2 a.m. that evening, the Alaskan Mountain Rescue Group had a helicopter out searching for him with infrared radar. They had searchers that were on foot, and at this point they were becoming concerned because the temperatures were so low. They figured he probably had hypothermia. Remember, he only had shorts and a t-shirt, and he was probably not only exhausted from the coming up, but if he was lost, he was probably even more exhausting trying to find his way out. Unfortunately, they didn't find anything that night, and the next morning, July 5th, another rescue squadron from the Alaskan Air National Guard, which usually specializes in searching for crashed planes and pilots, missing hikers. They came in with a special Pave Hawk helicopter and did another scan of the entire mountain. Then another team of around 60 searchers, and along with special canines, rescue dogs, search and rescue dogs, went out and searched, and they found nothing as well. They didn't find any clothing, no sign of him, nothing, which is just, if you look at this terrain and possibilities of where he could have gone, it's pretty much endless. If he had taken one wrong turn or a fall, it's just so vast in Alaska. So for the next 4 days, these search teams, along with dogs, the helicopters, they continued their search. But unfortunately, after about a week, the official search was called off. However, the Seward Volunteer Fire Department kept the search alive, and they were out with cadaver dogs, and Michael's family and friends paid for a very high resolution photograph of the mountain to be done, and they spent hours and hours volunteering, not only his family but state trooper, various search dogs. They got in mountain rescue experts, all just volunteering, and they spent over thousands of hours searching the whole area without finding anything, not a single clue. The Seward Volunteer Fire Department was just wonderful. They put in thousands of hours trying to help the family, and this family went on throughout the summer through mid-July. And unfortunately, just after a while, you can't imagine how daunting of a task it would be looking for somebody just in general, but a place like Alaska where it's just so vast and there's just so many possible places. So eventually they did have to make the hard decision to call off their volunteer search, still without finding anything. And in July of 2013, Peggy, Michael's widow, did sue the Seward Chamber of Commerce, that organizes this particular race. She sued for $5 million and eventually settled in October for roughly 20 grand, which probably would cover funeral costs. Because of this suit, the racers did organize a number of new safety measures in 2013. The racers had to sign these statements stating that they had completed going on the course at least one time. They had to have a 1-hour limit for racers to reach the summit. They had more Sewards sweeping the mountains, with these volunteer people. And they also had somebody that they called the Red Lantern that would follow the person that was in last place and make sure that they got to the finish line. Another new rule stated that if participants didn't make it to the halfway point within 1 hour, they were automatically disqualified. However, even with these rules, even today, people are often seriously injured in this race, including the race that Michael was in. There was 3 other people that were seriously injured, broken ribs, broken leg. This past year in 2021, somebody had a very serious injury where they broke several ribs. So it's definitely an insanely difficult race, but I mean, this is just a crazy mystery. As you can see, there's tons of people running this race and tons of spectators, and it just seems that Michael vanished into thin air. Sadly, later in 2012, Michael was declared legally dead through a court proceeding called presumed death trial, which is a way for families who have lost someone in accidents like this, plane crashes, things like that, where remains are not going to be recoverable or haven't been recoverable, for them to be legally declared deceased so they could hopefully move on and settle the estates and insurance and things like that. But even though he has been presumed dead, they still want to bring him home, and they still want to have answers. And the Alaskan state troopers keep this as an open case, and they say that they'll keep it as an open case until they bring Michael home. That's all the info I have for this case. I definitely want to dedicate this video to Michael LeMaitre, his family, his friends, all his loved ones, everybody who spent hours looking for him and just praying and hoping that someday somebody will find something so that he can be brought home and give a proper burial. I want to thank everybody for watching, as always, and special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music. And I know I say it in every video, but please be respectful in the comments and be respectful towards one another. I mean, if someone has a differing opinion from you, it doesn't mean that you can insult them, and you can get your point across without being rude. I mean, in any event, guys, I thank you for watching as always, and I am still working on the merch and some other things, and I will keep you guys in the loop. And I thank you for everyone that's been bringing different cases to my attention. This case was actually brought to my attention by a viewer that up in Alaska, so I appreciate that, and hopefully one day we can find some answers for Michael and his family. All right, guys, see you next time. Take care.